We continue now at the top of Daf Chafam Aleph and Meseches Nedarim. This is Nedarim Daf 20a. The Mishnah says, Nadar b'cheirim. Let's say a person makes a neder using the word cheirim. V'yamar lo nadarti ela b'chermo shel yam. But he says, really what I intended when I said cheirim was I meant the chermo shel yam, meaning a kind of trap that is used in the sea. B'karbon, or let's say use the word karbon, v'yamar, and then he says, lo nadarti ela b'karbona shel malachim. I was making a neder intending for the karbonos that are given to kings, not the karbonos that are given to God. Hare atzmi karbon, let's say the person says, I myself am a karbon. V'yamar, and then he says, lo nadarti ela be'etzem shehinach Lios Noderbo. He says, I only made the neder thinking about a bone that I set aside to make that neder with this particular bone. I didn't mean atzmi myself. I meant like etzem, a bone. Or konem ishti nehenisli. Let's say a person makes a konem that my wife, she can't derive benefit from me. V'yamar, and then he says, lo nadarti ela be'ishti harishona. My neder was really referring to my first wife. Shagei rashti, I've already divorced her. Al kulin, in all of these cases, ein nishalin lahem. We don't have to do any she'ela automatically. We take him at his word that the neder is not a real neder. You don't have to ask a chacham to undo it. V'im nishalu. Now, if they do ask to undo the neder, on shenosan, we punish these people, and we're strict on them, and that will be explained in the Gemara. Divrei Rabbi Meir, this is the opinion of Rabbi Meir. The Chachamim say, Poschen lohen Pesach mimokom acher. We find some kind of opening from some different scenario, some different circumstance that would allow us to undo the neder. And we teach them, Kadesh lo yinhagu kalas rosh b'nedarim. We teach them not to take nedarim so lightly. And the Mefarish over here says, Nadar b'cheirim, da'amar chayfetz zeh cheirim alai. The first case is a person says, this particular object is a cheirim to me. V'shov amar, then he says, Lo nadarti ela b'chermo shel yam. I was referring to chermo shel yam. Al shem haresha shetzadin bos hadagim. I'm talking about the net, which you trap the fish with. V'lo b'cheirim mamish. I didn't actually mean cheirim, the way that cheirim is commonly understood. Ela b'karbonos malachim, and then he says also, I didn't mean karbonos, I meant karbonos given to kings. Doronos shemakriven lefnei malachim. I'm referring to gifts that are given to the kings. V'cheinim amar hareini atzmi karbon. He says, I am a karbon. Demashma shehikdish es atzmo. Sounds like he sanctified himself. V'shov amar lo nadarti ela be'etzem echad sheyesh li b'soch beisi. I was just making a neder, he says. Afterwards he says, I was just making a neder with a particular bone in my house. Sheinachdev lios noder bo v'lo be'atzmi mamish. I set it aside to make a nedarim with that bone. I didn't mean atzmi, I didn't mean myself. I'll call elu ein nishalin lohen. The Mishnah said all of these cases you don't even need to do she'ela. The ein sarach she'ela. She'ela is not needed. The vaday mutter. It's automatically mutter. Hoel v'inu amri dal das kein amra, because they already said this was their intention. It's not a real neder. V'im nishalu. So then the Mishnah said, let's say they do. In bolishal, if they do come to ask a chacham to undo the neder. So the first opinion was we punish them and we're strict upon them, according to Rabbi Meir. But the chachamim omrim poschen lohen pesach. We find some kind of opening b'charot. We find some kind of regret that they might have had in making this neder. We teach them shelo yinhagu kalas rosh b'nedarim, that they should not take nedarim so lightly. And the Gemara says, Hagufa Kasha, the Mishnah is internally contradictory. Amrit first, the Mishnah says, Ein nishalom lahen. We don't do she'ela for them. Now the Gemara at this point in time, according to the Mefarish, understands that Ein nishalom lahen means we're very strict. We don't do she'ela and we don't undo the neder at all. V'hadar tani, and then the Mishnah says, Im nishalu, that if they do come to ask and undo the neder, on shenosanu machmir alein, we punish them and we're strict on them, but it sounds like they can undo the neder. The Mefarish over here says, V'kulan ein nishalin. Again, the initial understanding is the ein poschel and pesach. We don't find any opening. Ve'ein matir lam, we don't matter it for them. The kansinan lu mishum the nidra mamish mashma. We say that we impose a fine and we say this is a real neder and you're not allowed to undo it. V'hadar tani im nishalu demashma denishal. And then it says if they do ask, it sounds like we are allowed to do she'ela. We are allowed to undo the neder. And so the Gemara answers, Amar Rav Yehuda says, Hachi Katani, this is what the Mishnah means. V'kulon ein tzrichin she'ela. In all of these cases, you don't even require she'ela. That's how we explained it in the Mishnah. The Mefarish says, V'kulon ein tzrichin she'ela de mutarin below she'ela. In other words, we're very lenient. The neder is automatically mutter. It's not a neder. You don't even need she'ela. But when is this true? That's only by Talmud Chacham. That's only by a Talmud Chacham. The Mefarish says, he does it only once in a while and make a neder ki agavna like this. He's not going to end up, he's not going to become spoiled, so to speak. He's not going to be someone that is accustomed to doing this. But by an amoritz, sheboli shoel, if he's coming to ask to undo the neder, so we're going to punish him and we will be strict. And the Mefarish says, but we don't want him to be accustomed to doing this. And the Gemara continues, Bishlama machmir, and we understand what it means that we're strict with him. To lo paschina le becharat, in other words, we don't find an opening of regret. We don't undo the neder on his behalf. Ela on shen hechidami, but what do we mean over here when we say that we're going to punish him for doing this? And the Gemara answers Kedetani, as we learned in a Braisa. Misha nazar va'avar al niziruso. Let's say somebody becomes a nazir, but then he transgresses the nizirus. And the Mefarish over here says, v'avar al niziruso dechasavar b'tos nadar v'acharechein bali shal. He thinks that it was just a mistake. He's not really a nazir. And then later he's going to come in and he's going to come to ask to undo it. So ein is kakin lo. And so the Mefarish says, what does it mean? We don't give him this opening of regret to undo the neder, to undo the nazirus, until he actually conducts himself as if he's prohibited, the amount of days that he conducted himself as if it was mutter. In other words, there was a certain number of days he violated the nazirus. He has to keep the nazirus for that number of days, and then, only then, will we undo the nazirus. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, that's the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Amar Rabbi Yossi says, when is this true? Benazirus muetes. That's if it's a small nazirus, meaning to say it's just a 30-day nazirus, so then he has to keep it for that amount of time. Aval benazirus meruba, but if it was a long nazirus, so dayo lamed yom, it's sufficient that he keeps it for 30 days. He doesn't have to do longer than that. And again, then at that point in time, we will listen to his she'ela, and we'll be willing to undo the nazirus. And so the same idea is over here. Just like over there, there's a punishment that he has to conduct himself like a nazir for the amount of times that he violated the nazirus. So too over here, he's going to have to conduct himself along the lines of his neder, and that's the punishment for this for making this kind of a neder. And the Mefarish over here says, Nazirus muetes shekibel olav Nazirus lamed yom. That Nazirus muetes means it's just a 30-day Nazirus. Avolim kibel Nazirus meruba, let's say he had a longer Nazirus. V'yavar v'shas kuf yom, let's say he transgressed and he drank wine for 100 days. Ein omrim yinag iser kuf yom. We don't say that he's got to do 100 days of iser. Shenoag heter, the same amount of time, corresponding to the same amount of time he did heter. Ela la'onesh lamed yom kastam nazirus. The punishment is just 30 days, like a normal nazirus, like a stam nazirus. Hachinami onshenoso. So too we have it over here as well. We punish him in this case by the neder. Sheyinag iser benidro. He has to conduct himself as if he's prohibited with his neder. Uchiyamim sheikev al nidro kol nidro, according to the amount of days that he withheld doing it. Sha'amar lo nadarti ela bechermo shal yam. Meaning, when he claims that it was just chermo shal yam, v'noag heter beneder, and he conducted himself as if he had no neder, ad la'achar zman until there was a certain point in time when he decided he should ask and try to undo the neder. So again, for that period of time, that's the amount of time that he's going to be punished. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rav Yosef says, Hoel va'amri Rabbanan ein is kakim lo. Since the Rabbanan say that we're not supposed to listen to him when he comes to us to try to undo the neder, so beidina de mizdakaki, if a bezdin does try to deal with him and try to undo it, lo evet shaper, what they're doing is not proper. Rav Acha bar Yaakov says we would even excommunicate the bezdin in such a situation. And the Mefarish says, Beidina de mistagi like kodem sheyinog iser biatzmo, meaning if before he conducts himself with iser they start to undo the neder for him, lo avet shaper, then what they are doing is not proper. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, "V'chachamim omrim poschim lo pesach v'chulu." The Chachamim say we do find an opening for the neder, but we teach him not to take the nedarim lightly. And the Gemara says, Tana was taught liolam alti ragel b'nedarim. A person should not be accustomed to nedarim shesov cholim al b'shvuos, because in the end, if you're accustomed to nedarim, you're also going to misuse and you're going to abuse when you make a shvua, when you make an oath, and that's even more chomer. The alte ragil etzel amoritz, also don't be accustomed to being by an amoritz shesov chol achilcha tevolim, because in the end he's going to feed you tevel. Alti ragil etzel kohen amoritz, you also should not be accustomed to be by a kohen who's an amoritz shesov chol achilcha truma, because in the end he's going to feed you truma. The altar besichoy meisha, a person shouldn't have a lot of conversation with a woman shesovcha but love olideniyev, because in the end it will come to adultery. Rabbi Yoshia says, Kolat sofa benashim, anyone who looks at women, sofo bali de avera, in the end will come to transgress, to an avera. V'cholam mistakel ba'kovish alisha, anyone who looks at the heel of a woman, havyan lo bonim she'enan mehuganin, he's going to have children that are not proper. Amar Rav Yosef says, Uveishto nida, we're talking about over here his own wife who's a nida. Even looking at her is going to cause this issue. Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish says, Akeva dekatani b'makam hatinofes. When we say over here looking at the heel of the woman, it actually doesn't really mean heel, it's a euphemism. It means the area, the private area of the woman, shumechuvan keneged akev, which happens to correspond, it is opposite, the akev, it is opposite it the heel? And the Gemara continues, Tanya, we learned in a Brayso, the pasuk says, Ba'avur tia yirasu al panechem, so that his fear will be upon your face. Zu busha, this refers to somebody who has the ability to feel shame. Lavilti sachato, in order that you do not sin, that's the continuation of the pasuk. Malami, that teaches us sha'abusha mevi'li de yiraschet, that someone who has shame, who can experience shame, that brings the person to the fear of sin. Mikan Amr, from here they say, Simin Yafa B'Adam, it's a good sign for a person, Shu Baishan, that he's a person who can experience shame. Acherim Omrim, others say, Kol Adam HaMizbayesh, any person who feels shame, Lo B'Mehera Hu Chote, he will not quickly sin. Umi She'ein Lo Boshas Panim, and somebody who doesn't have Boshas Panim, who doesn't experience shame, B'Yadua Shelo Amdu Avosav Al Har Sinai, it is known that his fathers did not stand on Har Sinai. Amr Rabbi Yochanan ben Dahavoy says, Dala Dvarim Sachuli Malachi Asharis. There are 4 things that the Malachi Asharis told me. Chigrin, people who are lame, Mipnei Ma Havyan, why do they exist? Why are they born that way? Mipnei Shehovchem Es Shelchonim, it's because their fathers turn over their tables, means to say they have relations in an abnormal fashion. Ilmin, people who are mute, Mipnei Ma Havyan, why are they born that way? Mipnei Shemenashkim Alo Somakim, because their fathers kiss the private area. Charashim, people who are deaf, why are they born that way? Mimnei Mahavin, why do they exist? Mimnei Shemesaprim Mishas Tashmish, because their fathers are conversing during the act of relations. And Sumin Mipnei Mahavin, and why are people born blind? Mimnei Shemistaklim Ba'oso Makom, because their fathers, they're looking at the private area of the woman. And the Gemara continues, Uraminu, and we have the following contradiction. Shalu es Ima Shalom, they asked Ima Shalom, Mimnei Ma, why is it? And we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Chaf Amud Beis.